Hello, I'm Tom Wilkinson, and welcome to the Thinking in English podcast, a podcast for intermediate to advanced level learners of English. On today's episode, let's take a look at sarcasm in English. What is sarcasm? What is the point of it? And what are the different types of sarcasm? By the end of the episode, you should know the answers to all of these questions. Head over to thinkinginenglish.blog for a full transcript of today's episode. And why not take a look at my Instagram page, Thinking in English Podcast, for more great content. Here's today's episode. I've just been on a once-in-a-lifetime holiday. I'll tell you what, never again. My dad has suggested that I register for a donor card. He's a man after my own heart. I'm not a fan of the new pound coin, but then again, I hate all change. Don't worry, I've not gone crazy. These were 3 former winners of the Best Joke at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, which is one of the largest comedy festivals in the entire world. Did you understand those jokes? Can you understand why they are funny? And did you find them funny? One of the most difficult things a student can ever ask an English teacher to do is explain humour, and especially explain British humour. Trying to explain why something is funny is incredibly difficult, and most of the time, a joke loses its power and humour when you need to explain it. There can be a number of different reasons why a joke is funny. The content, the wordplay, the context, the punchline, and for English learners, humor can be so difficult to translate across languages and cultures. In fact, I often recommend people to just watch a lot of TV comedies. If you want to learn American humor, you can watch American comedies. If you want to learn Australian humor, you can watch Australian comedies. And this is often the best way to learn a country's sense of humor. So you can check out my episode on TV comedies to learn British English if you're interested. Our senses of humor are rooted in our nationalities, our upbringings, and the way we view the world, and what is familiar to us. I'm British, and British people love to laugh at ourselves. We will tell self-depreciating jokes all the time. This is a joke that is at our own expense. British comedy is also full of sarcasm, deep irony, and often discusses social, economic, political, and religious problems or issues. But humor is different all around the world. In France and Spain, it is popular to make jokes aimed at different regions within the country. Germans love wordplay and political satire. Polish humor tends to be very sarcastic and bitter. Japanese humor is full of long stories with foolish characters and social mistakes, which is why I still haven't got used to it. The stories are far too long for me to understand. US humor is probably the most famous type of comedy internationally, thanks to Hollywood and famous comedy TV shows. American jokes tend to be fast paced, use a lot of stereotypes and storytelling about everyday events. In South America, Brazilians can be dry, sarcastic, and sometimes dark with their comedy, while Argentinian comedy is full of references to national identity and history. Essentially, comedy and humor is different between cultures and nationalities. I've often had issues with American friends not understanding my self depreciating and sarcastic sense of humor. As I said earlier, British people like to joke about themselves and reply with sarcastic comments. I've used the word sarcasm and sarcastic a lot so far in this episode. And that is why the rest of this episode is going to be dedicated exclusively to sarcasm. However, if you'd like to hear other episodes about different parts of comedy, just let me know in the comments or send me a message on Instagram. So, what is sarcasm? The dictionary definition of sarcasm is the use of irony to mock or convey contempt. I've recorded an entire episode on irony a few months ago, which I'll, of course, link in the blog. But there are some important differences between verbal irony and sarcasm. Verbal irony, in humor terms, is when the speaker's words and the speaker's intent does not match up. And this difference between the words and the intent is ironic and funny. Sarcasm is more specific. It is the use of verbal irony to mock, laugh at, or ridicule someone else. For example, if you see a friend wearing a really silly hat, a British person might say, "Wow, a really cool hat. Where can I get one?" We're not being serious, but actually, we're just laughing at your hat. If someone is being insulted, it's probably sarcasm. And this becomes clear when we look at the origin of the word sarcasm. It comes from the ancient Greek sarkazein, which means to tear flesh, bite the lip in rage, or sneer. This makes sarcasm sound really, really mean. But this is not always the case. Sometimes sarcasm can be cute, light-hearted, and funny, especially when we use it in a self depreciating way or with our good friends. And this is how most British people tend to use it. Another important distinction to make is between sarcasm and satire, because these are two types of humor that can often look very similar. But satire tends to be for a positive reason, to mock bad social, political, and economic decisions or situations with the hope that it will make people think. Sarcasm usually has less positive intentions. The main intent of sarcasm is to laugh at someone else, not to make them think or change. So, what is the point of sarcasm? Well, at a basic level, it is to be funny. But sarcasm is risky, and especially for English learners. If you misunderstand or don't recognize the use of sarcasm, you might suffer hurt feelings or believe that someone is complimenting you when really they are laughing at you. I've actually had the opposite of this. I'm quite sarcastic, so when I compliment a non native speaking friend of mine, they often think I'm being sarcastic and actually insulting them, which I'm not. I'm actually genuinely complimenting them. However, if you learn and recognize how to use sarcasm, it can help you become even more fluent and reach the most advanced levels of English. In fact, research has been conducted that shows people who use sarcasm regularly are more creative than those who don't use sarcasm. We also use sarcasm to laugh about ourselves, criticize others, to show our disapproval of something, to make inside jokes, so jokes that only a few people understand, or as a defense mechanism when we are being criticized ourselves. Sarcasm is a really useful part of our language. So, now let's take a look at some of the different types of sarcasm. Self depreciating. Self depreciating sarcasm is when you use sarcasm to joke about yourself, especially by making yourself seem inferior. It's actually quite a good quality to have in a person. Being able to joke about yourself suggests that you are confident and don't take yourself too seriously. And people will often use self depreciating, sarcastic replies when you ask them to do something they don't really want to do. For example, Tom, do you mind working Friday and Saturday night this week? Why not? I'd just be sat at home alone in the dark, eating chips and watching cat videos on the internet otherwise. Brooding sarcasm. Brooding sarcasm is where you say something that sounds polite, but you are actually complaining and demonstrating your annoyance with the tone of your reply. We can often identify this type of sarcasm from context. If someone replies very politely and enthusiastically to an annoying request, then they are probably being sarcastic. For example, Tom, do you mind working Friday and Saturday night this week? I can't wait. Deadpan sarcasm. Deadpan sarcasm is where a sarcastic remark is said completely seriously without any emotion or humor. And this can lead to misunderstandings, as sometimes people are not sure if you are being serious or not. And it's often used with very unlikely situations as a response. For instance, Tom, do you mind working Friday and Saturday night this week? Sorry, I can't. I'm playing poker with the Queen of England this weekend. Polite. Polite sarcasm is similar to brooding sarcasm, but much more subtle. While brooding sarcasm is too polite and exaggerated, polite sarcasm is much less obvious. And sometimes it can take a while to realize someone is actually being sarcastic. Tom, do you mind working Friday and Saturday night this week? Sure, I'll bring some snacks. Obnoxious sarcasm. Obnoxious sarcasm is just annoying and childish. And it is the most likely form of sarcasm to make someone punch you in the face. It makes you seem like a jerk, an annoying or irritating person. For example, Tom, do you mind working Friday and Saturday night this week? Oh, great. There's absolutely nothing I'd rather do this weekend than work here. I'm so glad you thought of me. Manic. Manic sarcasm is unnaturally happy, ecstatic, and enthusiastic over something that should not provoke such a reaction. There can be similarities with other types of sarcasm, such as obnoxious, but the tone of delivery is very positive, even when they are clearly not being positive. For example, Tom, do you mind working Friday and Saturday night this week? Fantastic! I'd love to work this weekend. I can't believe I'm so lucky that I get to spend all of my time with you guys. It's just so great. Raging sarcasm. Raging sarcasm uses a lot of aggression, exaggeration, and violent threats. People using raging sarcasm will often use a terrible situation as a comparison, but they will say that they would rather be facing the terrible situation instead. For example, Tom, do you mind working Friday and Saturday night this week? Sure. I can't think of a better way of spending my Friday night, except maybe breaking both of my legs at the same time. So here is today's final thought. On this episode of Thinking in English, I've introduced you all to sarcasm and the different types of this common feature of English speech. But how can you detect sarcasm? The most important thing to consider when trying to recognize sarcasm is the tone of the speaker or writer. If their words are polite and happy, but their voice is annoyed, contemptuous, or angry, then they are probably being sarcastic. Understanding the wider context is important. If you were expecting a negative response or comment, but actually received a positive one, it might be sarcasm. You should also be very careful of when and where you use sarcasm. If you use it incorrectly, or your audience doesn't recognize it, it could cause confusion or actually end up hurting someone's feelings. Is sarcasm common in your language? How would you describe your country's humor? And have you ever misunderstood an English joke or sarcastic remark? Let me know in the comments on the blog, the comments on Spotify, or send me a message on Instagram and let me know what your type of humor is in your country.